Hey folks, welcome to Wolfman's Gaming Den. Today we'll be covering the review for the game Village Green. Village Green is basically sort of like a card game where you're playing cards into an area in front of you, trying to build the most beautiful village, if you call it that, with the final objective of winning the most point as you compete with other villagers who are basically the other players around the table. The game is designed by Pierre Sylvester and published by Osprey Games. So let's crack into it. We'll do a quick rules overview where we go through sort of like what you're really looking to accomplish with the game itself. And then we'll come back and I'll share my thoughts on what I think about it. Hey folks, welcome to the table. So let's do a quick overview of the rules for the game. I do have a detailed tutorial video out, so if you're looking to see how the detailed step-by-step setup works and all of the different nuances of the rules itself, I will have the link for the video down below. Hit that. That will give you a detailed walkthrough of it, but for the purposes of this, I'll give you a quick overview of how the game works. Before we go into our review section itself. So in Village Green, you're basically sort of like in charge of a village, and your village is basically competing to be the prettiest village, as it were, in the land. And you want to score most points. The way that you will score points is through these objective cards. The objective cards will basically be up at the very top row, and then over the course of the game, you will get a few objective cards in the column underneath the village card as well. So this is basically the market row that everybody can draw cards from. This is your personal play area, which is generally a 4x4 grid. So the first row is always there at the start of the game. This will always be dealt at the start of the game to you. These will tell you the objectives that you want to meet for those particular columns underneath it. And then over the course of the game, you'll be able to play out more of these award cards out here, which will then define the condition by which you will score for those rows as well. So you're basically setting up a matrix in which you will score points. On your turn, you can do one of two main actions. The first action that you can do is you can draw a green card and then play a green card. Basically what that means is you will pick up a green card either from this row or from the top of the deck, and you can put it in your play area over here. When you do that, you must make sure that if you're placing it next to another green card, it matches the flower type or the flower color that's on the top left hand side. So if I wanted to play this, let's say for example, if over here, there's nothing adjacent to it, so it really doesn't matter in terms of what flower I pick for this one. But if this was already here, and let's say this was, I wanted to play this card over right next to it, I must make sure that it matches either the color or the type for each of the flowers adjacent to it. And adjacency in this game is orthogonal, not diagonal. So in this case, it matches the flower type. These are both roses. Even though they don't match the color, that's fine. Now, on the other hand, if, let's say, for example, this card was here and we wanted to play this card over here, we could not do that legally because this matches the flower type over here, but it does not match either the color or the flower type over here. Now, however, we could, of course, place it over here right underneath it because there's nothing adjacent to it, but this matches the flower type to this one. So that's fine, and that's a legal move. Of course, if you do not want to place it in your play area, either because it's not a good option or you just don't want to do it. And again, remember, you do have a hand of 3 cards. So whenever you're drawing a card, it adds to your hand. So you have a few cards to choose from. You have 4 cards rather to choose from at that point. If you don't want to play any of the cards in your play area, you must take one, put it underneath the deck, and then put it over there like so. So that's the one action that you can do. The other action that you can do is you can pick up one of these award cards over here and play it in your play area. You can play it either on top of an existing award card, which means that the objective by which you will score that row or column is now completely different and it's based on the new one. Or you can put a new one down in an area where you don't have an award card yet. So you might have a situation like this. When you pick up an award card, I can put it down on top of an existing one, or I can put it down by itself over here. Whenever putting down a card, it doesn't always have to go to something adjacent to it. I could, as an example, put it over here in the 3rd row, as it were, even though there's no card next to it, and then I'd be setting myself up for other cards I want to put it down in those areas afterwards. So that's perfectly legal as well. Generally, whenever you're playing a green card, you cannot overwrite unless you have a field that you've played in that area. Field cards look like these. So if I've played this out here, I can ignore the rules on the flower, but on a subsequent turn, if I wanted, I could put my green card on top of this one. That is the only type of card that will allow green cards to be put on it. So those are the two basic, those are the two main type of actions that you can do over the course of the game. You can also use your village card for a one-off effect. Basically, you will flip the card over with the gray side up, and you can only do that once over the course of the game. This will allow you to refresh either one of these two rows, in which, in case you don't like any of the cards that are out there. So by refresh, you take all the cards, put it at the bottom of the deck, draw 3 new ones, and then you do your main action. This must always be before taking the main action. Or the other action that you can do when flipping this over is you can take a green card and play a green card action. The only difference is you can take the green card and overwrite an existing green card, and that does not have to be a lawn. That can be any other card, but you must still meet the rules of adjacency. So it still must meet the flower color or the flower type you're putting it down next to. So that's pretty much it. The game will continue until either this deck runs out or this deck runs out, or somebody's completed their 3x3 grid of the green cards. So 4x4 grid overall. This, of course, the first row and the first column are your village card and your award card. So you have a 3x3 grid of the green cards. So as soon as somebody completes that 3x3 grid, or one of those two decks run out, that signals the end of the game. You will finish that round so that everybody gets the same number of turns, and then you will add up points at the end of the game. If your village card is not flipped over, you get 1 point for that. If you have played any cards that have these points printed directly on it, and these are only on the lake cards or the pawn cards, I forget what these are called, you will score 2 points for each of these. And then the main way in which you will score points are with these objective cards. So you basically read the objective on the card itself, and you will see how well or not so well you've met the objectives with the columns underneath it or the rows to its right. And you will add all of those up, and then whoever has the most points wins. So let's go back to the table. That was a quick overview of the rules. And let's talk about what my thoughts are on the game, things that I liked, things that I didn't like, and generally my key impressions of them. Welcome back, everyone. So those were the rules for the game itself. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of how the game plays and its key features and how sort of like what you're really looking to accomplish over the course of the game. So before I start talking about the things that I liked and didn't like about the game, let's quickly talk about the production quality. And generally, for the most part, it's something that I'm definitely really happy with. Osprey Games definitely has a good reputation when it comes to putting out good quality components and in their games. This is definitely no exception. This being a card-driven game, obviously you want cards that are good in quality. This is definitely pretty decent. These should hold up well with multiple plays if you do end up getting this game to the table quite a bit. So that's all fine and good. The artwork on the cards is excellent. It has a very nice, pleasing, pastoral feel to it. So if you're looking for something for that aesthetic, and this game, of course, is basically that aesthetic itself, right? Like it's a competition of sort of like a English village, as it were, and you're competing to have the prettiest village in the land. So you needed to have artwork that captured that quite well, and this one definitely does. So I'm very happy with that. So that's all good. As I was playing this game, there were definitely lots of comments around the table in terms of just how good the art on these were. So that's definitely a big plus for the game itself. The one thing that I will quickly add, which I wish were a little bit different, is as we went through the rules, I talked about the flowers on the top left-hand side of the card itself and how you had to match them. It was not always easy to tell some of them apart, not all of them. For the most part, you could. The red and the blue ones were fairly easy to tell apart, both in terms of type and the color, obviously. For the yellow, obviously you can tell the color, but because the color comes off is so light, if you're either not really looking up close or with the right light conditions, as it were, sometimes it was difficult to differentiate the different flower types for the yellow card. So keep that in mind. I definitely had one game where there were quite a few mistakes made in terms of the placement of the yellow card. Somebody thought that they were doing it right. Turns out that they were not doing it right, and then there was a huge debate over whether the flowers matched or not. And the very fact that people were debating just meant that just given certain lighting conditions, it's hard to tell. May just be a fault of the lighting condition that we're playing under. But again, it's something that should be very easy to mitigate. So I'm surprised that situation did arise. It can be a little hard to tell. But other than that, top-notch quality and everything that you would expect for a small card game. Box size is perfect, and everything is quite decent. So, with that said, the gameplay is quite good. There's a couple of things that I'll come to later on around not necessarily balancing, but just things that I wish were a little bit different. But for the most part, it represents a very interesting puzzle that you're looking to sort out for yourself over the course of the game. When you first start out, it feels like you're playing something that's quite light and breezy, and it excuse me, it is a light game. It's not a complex game by any means. But when you're looking to put down certain cards for certain award cards, there can be a bit of an optimization puzzle in here that makes you think a little bit more than what you would expect at the very start of the game itself. I look upon that as a plus for the game. What it basically means is that it is a filler weight game, but it gives you a little bit of meat to sink your teeth into, which I definitely like and I enjoy. So that's a good thing for me. I think it's welcoming enough for newcomers. So if you have somebody who's not a regular gamer who's sitting down at the table, you can definitely teach them the game quite easily, get it up and running. It's easy to teach and easy to start. Obviously, if you're an experienced gamer, it's going to be even faster. But it gives both the experienced gamer and the newcomer something to really enjoy for themselves in this one. So I think as a sort of like a game that scales at all experience levels, I think this is really good. In terms of the sort of puzzle that you're solving, I think it's quite interesting as well. It reminded me a little bit of Calico as I was playing, which is a bit of an interesting comparison because Calico is a tiling game. But if you really think about it, you have different objectives that you're looking to meet in Calico. You want to have certain type of tiles around other tiles, and then you want to have a certain number of them in a row or a column or whatever to score certain points in different ways. And this reminded me a little bit of that as well because you have these objective cards. And then, of course, you're scoring points based on those. So you want certain trees here, you want certain flowers there, but you don't want this flower over here. It was definitely an interesting dynamic by including both positive and negative points on the award cards. And I think that definitely added a very interesting wrinkle to it because usually when you play these type of games, either you're scoring points or not scoring points. But in this one, you can score points or you can lose points, and it can become quite interesting. If you can optimize it well, it's a very satisfying feeling that you've been able to put out those green cards in a way that meets the condition for the row and the column, and it's all excellent. Or you might often find yourself in a bit of a bind where the cards that you have in the row and the column basically maybe conflict with one another, and then you have to figure out a way how to get around it. Do you want to sort of get a card that meets the condition for one and not the other? Or maybe you want to swap, put in another award card on top of the one that doesn't work for you quite as well. It's a bit of an interesting puzzle to play out on that front. And the fact that you can play award cards on top of others definitely adds both. It works in two ways, right? Like it adds a bit of flexibility for yourself because if you have a card that's not working for you, you can always replace that with someone else. But it also puts you in a spot where you realize that it might, because as the game goes along, it may evolve in a different way, and you might realize that your original card perhaps worked better for you after all, based on certain other green cards that you got later on in the game. But of course, that's now a bygone, so you can't really worry about that at that point. Again, another interesting dynamic that comes into it. So sort of like you're evolving objective cards, both the positive and the negative points that you earn on those as well. The way that the green cards function is fairly, it's a strong gameplay mechanic as well, because usually, for the most part, when you have a green card put down, it's locked in where it is, unless it's a lawn card or you decide to spend your village card to be able to overwrite something. But you still have to meet those placement rules, so it's not quite as easy as just simply, overriding something. You still have to meet those placement rules, so it still makes it tight and not something that you can do quite as easily, but it is an option that you have, which is quite good. A couple of things that I found a little, and again, I think I need to get this to the table a few more times to have a final opinion on it, but I think I've played it often enough that I can factor that into my final rating. And now these are as follows. So firstly, you obviously have a smaller number of these award cards than the green cards. And that is fine. But you might find, because you can always, keep playing multiple award cards, you might have a player around the table where, they're just focusing on the award cards and they're hogging it and they're just overriding other cards that they have out there. And then others might be scrambling, realizing that this is now starting to dwindle, and then, you go out and try to get it. And because the objective cards are quite diverse in terms of how they score as well, you also have to keep in mind it's very situational in terms of which award card works for you when. So while at the very start of the game you might be able to put something down and then plan around it, later on in the game it's a little bit more difficult, because you now have to fit the objective card, take the objective card and get it to fit with the green card that you might already have got laid out. And sometimes it might work and sometimes it might not. And while that aspect of it is fine, the fact that somebody can hog the award cards is a bit of a problematic. I had a two-player game where I realized that I was doing a lot more of the, draw the award card and play the award card action than my opponent. And then at some point they realized that they'd not got any of their award cards laid out in that column underneath the village card, and that they were scrambling at the last minute to try to find something that worked for them. So something to keep in mind. Maybe some sort of a limitation in terms of how often you could do it might not have been a bad idea, just to make sure that people are a little bit more judicious with it as opposed to just doing it again and again. So that's one thing. I spoke about sort of like the design aspect with those yellow flower cards, so that's there as well. But generally, I think it works well. I found it a bit of an interesting puzzle in terms of solving. There's enough depth in here to keep everybody happy and occupied, and I like it. Yeah. The other, sorry, I meant to get to this as well. The other second aspect that I found which was a little bit frustrating, was, again, I think this is more dependent on the number of player counts, the player count that you play with, how often these cards cycle. So if you're playing a two-player game and it's just you and somebody else, these cards are not going to cycle that often. So if you have a row that doesn't work for you, either you have to spend your, I'm going to say, precious village card to do a refresh, or you could continuously start drawing from the top of the deck itself. And drawing from the top of the deck is blind luck. Like, there isn't really much of a strategy at that point. You're just basically hoping to draw something that works for you in that situation. And that's not a fun position to find yourself in. So I wish that there was a way in which it got cycled a little bit more frequently at smaller play counts. It's less of an issue if you're playing with 4 or 5 players. So that's definitely there, because you have more people taking actions. Maybe there's a card in there that worked for somebody by the time it gets back to you. So something new hopefully comes out by the time it's your turn. But in smaller play accounts, it can sort of like create a bit of a dull period in the middle until something happens that breaks that cycle, as it were. But those are the only couple of things that I didn't like about it. And even then, those are not enough to ruin my enjoyment of the game. I like the game. I like the puzzle it represents. Scalability on experience is good. Scalability on player counts is pretty good as well, because if you're playing with different player counts, you just basically adjust the number of cards you have in here, and you're still solving that same puzzle in front of you. And if you did not have that issue of the card cycling not frequently enough at 2 players or the smaller player counts, I would probably prefer it at that smaller play count, simply because it's your turn a lot more frequently. You're doing more actions over the course of the game itself, as opposed to if it's a 5-player game. There's obviously a lot more dynamic aspect to it. But what that basically means is that by the time it can take a bit of a time by the time it gets back to you, as it were. It can also be slightly AP inducing, but again, that really depends on the type of play you play with. I played this with inexperienced players, not found it to be an issue. I think it really boils down to the kind of player you play with, but for the most part, should not be as much of a problem unless somebody's really trying to have picture-perfect rows and columns, which usually will not work out quite the same way. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good things in here. All things considered, my final rating for this, I would give this a solid 7.5 out of 10. I would definitely recommend this game if you're looking for something that's a filler game that plays in roughly half an hour, but gives you enough to sink your teeth into, solve a little bit of an interesting spatial puzzle, as it were. This should work quite well. I recommend it. if this so far sounds like this is something that might be of interest to you, I would say definitely check it out. Play this at least once, and you might find that something you want to have in your collection after all. And that's Village Green for me with my rating. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any thoughts, comments, suggestions, feel free to leave them down below. I'll get to them as soon as I can. And in the meanwhile, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.